Greetings and welcome to HRM 300. I am Professor Kevin Matthews for the course today, and today's topic we're going to talk about the chapter 2 in the book, which is of course strategic management. And we've really kind of talked about in chapter 1 when I did the last video where we talked about strategic management, and what we really wanted to focus on with the way that we kind of thought about things, and I'm going to kind of come back to this every single time that we have a class or I do a video or we talk about things. Remember the sort of the foundation, sort of this Greek structure. I told you I didn't have a whiteboard, but if I did, I would draw the structure. And basically what it is if you think about it, you know, you have this foundation, and the absolute foundation in any well-run HR department slash organization would be a strategic plan or the strategic management of the organization. The second layer of that foundation then becomes diversity, and then in each one of those pillars that we kind of talk about, where we say recruiting, you know, selection process, training and development, safety, and you know, laws and employee policies and things of that nature. So when we're building the organization's strategic plan, and remember, we do this, we don't let finance do it, we don't let accounting do it, we don't let you know, marketing, oh God, don't let marketing do it. This is our plan, this is what we do. It's taken a while where you know, initially, you know, we weren't seen as kind of the home of the strategic plan, but I think over time it's kind of found its home here where in my opinion it rightfully belongs, considering everything that we have to do. So again, you know, I'm going to kind of reading off the screen as we talked about from chapter 2. You know, in the first part they talk about the value planning. I'll let you read that on your own. It's kind of a short story. I actually like it, and I would recommend it to you. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in this section is the strategic planning, and we'll talk about, you know, of course, learning objectives here, explain the difference between HRM and personnel management, and be able to define the steps in an HRM strategic planning. You know, so, you know, and one of the things I really like about this, they talk about the history, and I kind of talked a little bit about that in the first video, where we really kind of focused on what HR used to be, and that was kind of where all the paper went to, all the records went to. When someone was disciplined, it went into their records, and they were kind of the, you know, in the Navy, we used to have this thing called the yeoman, or the position called the yeoman. You know, yeomen were in charge of part of that. You know, we had yeomen who were more administrative kind of people. We had personnel men, which were really the personnel department, and both of these functions together really kind of formulate what I would think of as modern HR, especially within the military concept. So one of the things that, you know, they kind of talk a little bit about here is how they had all these the different departments, and one of the best parts about this section is they get down to this this chart that they put in the book, which it's a chart that they've carried over from other books, and so I've been very happy that they've kept up with it. So talk about with the personal management focus, you know, it's administration of policies, whereas with HRM, we're helping to achieve strategic goals through people. And second, we have the standalone programs such as training, which is the personal management focus. HRM focus is HRM training programs that are integrated with the company's mission and values. Then back to personnel management focus, we've got personnel department responsible for managing people versus the HRM focus, where its line managers share responsibility in all areas of people hiring and managing. And then back to personnel management focus, where we creates a cost within the organization, and the idea with HRM focus is that we create contribute to the profits objectives of the organization. And so when you're talking about personnel management versus HRM focus, and I kind of hinted on this a lot in the first video, we're moving away from being sort of a cost center where people are no longer costs. We see people as assets, you know, which is basically a thing that has economic value, and so, you know, future economic value, and so it gets used to generate that. Now, I kind of broke it out that way for a particular reason. I didn't want to tell you what my thought process is on the difference between those until you actually looked at that and thought about it yourself. And just, kind of think about it to yourself. What do you see as the difference between those two? You can pause the video if you want to do that thinking before you continue on. I would urge you to do that. Think about what the difference between personnel management focus, between the HRM focus. So hopefully you're back, and so the personnel management focus, obviously, when I first looked at this, the first thing that came to my mind was passivity. The HR is kind of just there. Nobody really notices them unless something goes wrong. They're kind of the, where, they just kind of exist. They kind of do things. I mean, they're important things. You have to administer policies. That's critical to any organization. The standalone programs, such as training, really, people will set up training, for example, an operations manager may have training in operations, and he's like, this is only to deal with operations, as opposed to, the idea that the training programs would be integrated with the missions and values. There's been times where, you go to an organization, and I think we see this a lot, especially in the military, especially in the Navy, where we have surface ships, we have subsurface ships called submarines, and then we have aviation. Okay, if you go to each one of those three groups of people within the Navy, different core values. Well, not different core values, but different cultures, shall we say. For example, when I was an officer, I wore brown shoes. Brown shoe Navy versus black shoe Navy. We kind of have that, and anybody who's ever been in the Navy is kind of nodding their head, going, "Oh yeah, I know what that is." And that's kind of the big thing. For those of you who are not in the Navy, brown shoe military people were kind of seen more as more relaxed. Probably. I kind of think of I mean, I don't want to say frat boy mentality because that's got bad connotations in other ways, but they tended to be a little bit more relaxed. Whereas the black shoes, we always kind of made fun of them because they were kind of serious about everything. And I'm sure that the black shoes have some pretty interesting things to say about us brown shoes. But when you're kind of looking at the difference between standalone training programs versus training programs that integrated the missions and values, the Navy really kind of changed recently because within each of those three cultures, the Navy really didn't have an integrated training focus until I'd say probably within the last 20-30 years that they started getting towards it, and they've been steadily moving more towards it, more and more. I mean, they started having different officer basic courses, and like I remember when I got commissioned, there was a program that they brought us all into, how to be a good division officer, because no matter whether you are black shoe, brown shoe, whatever, at some point you're going to be a division officer. And so there was some of that integration that was kind of happening, but really kind of trying to focus on the entity level. But really, when you talk about the obvious answer, difference between personnel management focus and HRM focus, is strategic involvement. Like I said, up until this point, we really didn't have a whole lot of strategic involvement up until we really started focusing on the strategic management focus. Everything was really, we're just there. We're not really doing a whole lot. And so I think that, bringing the strategic management focus into the organization really has made an HR a much more formidable organization within the entity. Then they kind of talk a little bit about, most people would agree that the duties fall under HRM, each aspect SPA. They talk about staffing, workplace policies, compensation and benefits. Again, compensation and benefits being one of my favorite. I'm gonna kind of talk about it from that perspective, and I think you'll understand a lot of the things that I'm trying to get at here. When you start talking about compensation and benefits, obviously I need to be able to pay people enough in order to keep them here. That's a very important. That's a very important aspect of that. And so if I'm able to pay people in order to be able to keep them here, that's all well and good. But what if I'm offering them things that are incentivizing them to do things that are contradictory to the organization's goals? Okay, so for example, if if I work for a not-for-profit, for example, and the goal is to our goal is to work, save the rainforests and things of that nature. And I pay people in order to, and I build their bonuses based off the fact of how fast that they do things. And so I'm trying to have them do various aspects of the entity, and and I'm doing a horrible job making these things up on the fly like this. But I pay them based on their speed of being able to do things. Some people may take shortcuts that involve printing more paper, which kind of goes counterintuitive to some of the other things that the organization really stands for. And so while we may be fighting deforestation, we're actually causing some deforestation because we now incentivize people to go faster, as opposed to aligning those pay performances based off of the organizational goals. Very good example of that. Take that same example. You work for a nonprofit that's trying to work on preventing deforestation. You could have bonuses that are tied into people's overall paper consumption. I mean, that sounds minor, or it might sound major. I don't know, depending on you. But that's a way that you can kind of do some of the compensation and benefits, where you're trying to put in the overall organizational mission and values and their strategic management plan in order to get that kind of set up. Training development especially, I see this a lot. When we do training and development, obviously we want to train people to be safe. We want to train people to do good things. But the most important thing is that, again, you take that strategic management, whatever your values are of your organization, your strategic goals of your organization, then you have your diversity, and then from there you develop your training programs in order to make sure that people are able to accomplish the things that they need to accomplish. And then, of course, they talk about regulatory issues and worker safety. I've always said safety is uncompromising. I don't care what your values are. Safety's got to be an important thing. But there's certain organizations that tend to focus a lot more on safety than others. So, say, for example, if I was working for a construction company, I'm probably going to be focused a little bit more on safety than if I work in an accounting firm. I mean, in an accounting firm, the most dangerous thing we have to deal with is, electric shock or paper cuts. Whereas at a construction firm, chunks of metal can fall on somebody's head and kill them. So we need to be obviously very careful about those things. So when they get down to this, where they talk about HRM versus personnel management, the human resource strategy is an elaborated system of systematic plan and action developed by Human Resource Department. It kind of gets back to that whole thing. We really have to have that development of the strategic plan. And again, HR has to be a huge component in that in order to make sure that it's successful. They kind of talk a little bit about the Ulrich model, which we'll look at a little bit later on. And hopefully we go ahead and we will be able to talk a little bit more about that. So, but, like I said, we'll talk about the model later on, but, some of and I just saw this, the newly revised model, looks at 5 main areas. You want to be the strategic partner, you want to be the change agent, you want to be the administrative expert and functional expert, and then the human capital developer, and then the employee advocate. Again, and maybe I'm, wrong in saying this, you're going to be the employee's advocate, but remember, we still work for the company, and that's going to create a massive conflict of interest over time as you start working on to perform your functions. And so, but that's an important function that you have to understand. Oftentimes we're going to be developing policies, programs, and procedures in order to keep the organization alive, keep it going, fight entropy, and to do things in order to continue to be successful. Then we have they said HRM is a strategic component of the business. They said keep the model in mind, and then they talk a little bit about the model. then they give you some ideas as to how to really influence this model and become successful. Make it applicable. Often people spend an inappropriate or an inordinate amount of time developing a plan, but then the plan sits in some file somewhere. We always make the sort of the thing where we say, hey, we build the plan, we put it in this nice, beautiful binder, and then we stick it on the shelf. And then, hey, we got a strategic plan. It's there. And then nobody ever cracks it again until they take it down to rebuild the next strategic plan. That's not helpful. That's not good for the organization. It's not good for the people. And you probably just wasted a lot of people's time. The most important part, and I used to actually work in an organization once and I actually had a very good contrast between two organizations. One organization, the head of the company basically sat down with two of his favorite, it's an accounting firm, and he sat down with two of his favorite accounting partners, and they sat down and built the strategic plan, and then they put it out for everybody else. The other partners who were not part of the building of the strategic plan and everybody else in the company just kind of went, they had no buy-in. They had no thought process in this. If you're throwing out a strategic plan and nobody has a clue as to what's in it until you present it, you probably didn't involve enough people. Okay. Now that said, if you work at an organization that's got 1,000 people, obviously not everyone's going to know what's in it before it happens, but you probably need to make sure that you're involving enough people in order to make this happen. They said, you also want to be a strategic partner. Alignment of the corporate values in the strategic process should be a major objective of the plan. And again, you start to ask yourself, why are we here? What are we doing here? What do we want to do here? I would ask everybody, if you go into my website, my company's website that I own, it's pretty clear, the mission values, the mission vision statement and the value statement that I have for my organization. And we used to teach this a lot more concretely. I think it's kind of merged, it's kind of blurred a little bit, but the mission statement is where we are today. The vision statement is where we want to be in the future. The value statement states who we are and what defines us. And I have those three things put on my website, and I look at them every now and then to remind myself, this is why I'm here. You want to involve people in building the plan, and you also want to understand how the technology can be used so that it can be successfully implemented in the organization. Final part of this section is to talk steps to the strategic plan creation. Okay, so then we're talking about the steps to strategic plan creation. One of the things that I used to do when thinking about this, or when thinking about any kind of change development or implementation, when we took the PHR test, and I'm sure that Hrm's going to be doing the same thing, we used to have what we call the ADDIE model, which is the assess, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And even the systems development life cycle is kind of the same type thing, but it was 7 steps instead of 5 steps. Systems development life cycle is something that's very popular within IT consulting. So if you ever work in IT, you've probably heard of the systems development life cycle. And I know they still teach it, because one of my friends who's getting his master's in IT was asking me some questions about it because he heard me talking about it one time. But that's kind of what you need to do. And if you think about it, the ADDIE model, it kind of gets you to the idea of what needs to happen in order to implement successful change. And so the first thing that they talk about is conduct a strategic analysis. So we're talking the assess. You need to assess what's going on in the organization. And the one way you do that is you understand the company's missions and values. And again, sometimes that's written down somewhere, but the question is, are you really practicing it? I've worked in organizations where, the head of the office comes out and he does the talk, and the first thing that they would do is they would recite what the mission and the vision statement were, to remind people constantly talking about that. When you did your evaluation reports, they were based on the mission and value statement that they, mission and vision statement and the value statement that they had. So again, integrating all of that into the organization, giving it an opportunity to resonate with a lot of people, so that in the grand scheme of things, they build into it and they develop it, and it becomes part part of this overwhelming part of the organization that people can't say, oh, if you're going up to somebody randomly and just saying, hey, what are the mission and vision statements? And they have no clue, you're probably not saying it often enough. And I know some people kind of say, well, shouldn't they be more worried about their job? Yeah, but if they don't know what the mission vision statement is, they're probably not, they're going to do their job, but are they doing the job in line with the organization? And that's the $60 million question, right? Understanding the HRM department mission values. Okay, so one of the things they talk about here, and I really like this, is that you want to understand, not only do we want to understand the company's mission values, but as part of it, part of the organization development plan, we also want to understand how HRM's department fits into that. And it's important because, there's the old saying, and I used to know what it was in Latin, I can't remember it right now, but it's know thyself, know thyself. So if, you have to understand who you are before you can start going out to some people and saying, this is how we want things to change. In human resources, if you start saying, well, we're the human resource department, we guide change. That's not something that really kind of lines up with that, but it's probably something that as a department manager, you should be encouraging your people to kind of develop. And once the organization's goals are set up, and if they're not, and you're running into resistance with it, sometimes you can start with this. I did have one time where I worked at a company where they actually started with the departments coming up with their mission, vision, value statement, and then they kind of got together and they said, operations says this, accounting says this, finance says this, and then they kind of got together and they merged. That's kind of how they figured out how they did their mission, vision, value statement. Personally, it's not my favorite way of doing it. I tend to feel that, a better way to do it is sort of a qualitative research type project where, you're sitting down, you're having focus groups with people where you're talking about what is it you think we should be, who is it you think we should be, but you need to make sure that those focus groups are representative of a wide variety of people. So, understanding the life cycles of the stages of the HRM strategy, and this is basically what they talk about. And I'm sure that if you've taken any other management courses, you understand the life cycle of an organization: introduction, growth, maturity, decline. And one of the things I like about this is it breaks it out kind of sort of for an HR area where they talk about, with the introduction, they talk about staffing, where it's track the best technical and professional talent. You're just trying to bring people in. You're not really caring about, again, usually in the beginning of an organization, you're reactive. You're not focusing on their various different functions within the organization. You're like, I need a person to do this job, I'm hiring somebody, boom. I need a person to do this job, I'm hiring somebody, boom. I need someone to do this job, move this person over to here. And you're just kind of doing things because, as leaks are showing up in the dam, okay? And then, as we move to growth, you want to recruit adequate numbers of mixed qualifying workforce, plan management succession. This is where you're kind of thinking about this in the growth. Now, these are some ideals, because something that we're noticing in many organizations is that almost nobody plans succession. I'm going to be here forever, right? I'm not dying. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not retiring. I'm going to be doing this job for the rest of my life. Something people don't realize is that, the rest of your life, I had a very good friend of mine. He went to the doctor, found out the rest of his life was 2 years. He needed a succession plan. He didn't have one. and that kind of made a pretty bad thing for him. So I really encourage people to really focus on, make sure that you got a good succession planning. When you get to maturity, you want to encourage sufficient turnover to minimize layoffs. Some people think that turnover is bad for an organization. I disagree with that. I tend to think that turnover can be good. It brings in fresh ideas. You want to encourage mobility. Eventually, jobs are going to change within the organization, particularly as you get to a maturing cycle where you're no longer focusing on massive growth, but instead more of a sustainability and a prevention of entropy. But that's kind of what needs to be So to be looked at that point is kind of how that change really affects a lot of things. Then you want to plan and develop, and then during decline, you want to plan and implement workforce reductions and reallocations. Every organization is going to go through all of these cycles, whether you like it or not, and it's surviving each one of these that's really important. They talk about identifying strategic HR issues, and this is where they get into SWOT analysis. SWOT's a very popular buzzword. If you want to impress somebody in an interview, it's good to talk about SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT analysis is something that we tend to do frequently. My organization, not so much because there's not too many people with me. But I do some thinking about this during the down season. What are my strengths? Where am I doing really good stuff? Where are my weaknesses? Where do I need to find people in order to be able to be more successful? And they give you some opportunities, not opportunities, but some examples of that. Prioritize issues and actions. Based on, it's based on gathering data. And this is where, when we started talking about ADDIE, this is really where you're trying to do sort of the design and develop. It's where where you're prioritizing issues and actions, and then drawing up an HRM plan. From there, you then start working on how you're going to actually do this plan. All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about writing the HRM plan. And the learning objective here, of course, is describe the steps in development of an HRM plan. This is less about the organization's plan and more really sort of the department. And in theory, your plan, the HRM plan, while applying to HR, obviously it's going to involve other sections of the organization. But operations should have a plan, marketing should have a plan, accounting should have a plan. And so sometimes it's up to us to make sure that we're informing them that they need to have these plans. But sometimes what ends up happening is they don't want to do that. But we're going to really focus on how HRM plan goes, and then you can export that to the other parts of the organization as you start working on higher levels of the organization. So you have the company strategic plan, which then builds the HRM strategic plan, which then builds the HR plan. All right, the company strategic plan, which focuses into the HRM strategic plan, you do the strategic analysis, identify issues, prioritize actions, and then draw up the strategic plan. When you get to the HR plan, this is more sort of the tactical. And actually, now that I think about it, that's how I've described this in the past. The company plan being strategic, obviously HRM is sort of strategic, but I kind of think of that as more operational, especially you military guys. There's strategic, there's operational, and then there's tactical. I've tended to feel that the HRM strategic plan is actually better described as more of an operational plan for the military people, and then the HR plan itself is more the tactical plan. Excuse me. And with the HR plan, you're going to determine needs, recruit, select, train, develop, compensate, and then appraise performance. And as you can tell, those are very tactical type things that you're going to do. I know when we think of tactical, we're thinking, like SEAL Team 6 operator or something of that nature. Because obviously the SEALs are the most cool strategic, special forces organization in the United States Arsenal. Obviously that's what I would imagine, or the SEALs as a whole are just, I think they're the baddest. But again, I'm Navy, so I might be a little biased. The HR plan, of course, you determine their needs. That's a very tactical kind of thing that you need to do. And these are the kind of things that we do in the organization all day by day, but sometimes we don't think about how we're doing those. And so this kind of gets you, by developing that HR plan, you're actually going to kind of come up with some of the ideas on how you would do some of this stuff. And one of the things I really like about this is we're going to talk about each of these sections as we go throughout the course. You got to determine human resource needs, kind of what we're doing right now. Determine the recruiting strategy. So we're doing recruiting, selection of employees. That's another chapter. Develop training. That's another chapter. Determine compensation is another chapter. Appraise performance is another chapter. The only thing that's missing is keep them safe at always. We used to when I had this delusional brain thing going on in my mind, and I actually showed up to Army ROTC for a year, thinking I was going to join the Army. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I'm joking. The Army guys know that us Navy guys, we kid with you. Some of my best friends are. But when I went to there, we always just talk mission first, people always. I never lost that in my life. I think that was probably the one thing I did learn from Army ROTC that I take with me even to this day. It's mission first, people always. So, you're going to determine your human resource needs, where they're going to say, were enough people hired? Did you have to scramble to hire people at the last minute? Just some various things that they're kind of talking about. Probably, I think it's interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into recruiting and selection, where we're talking about job description development. Probably the biggest pet peeve that I have with a lot of people in the organization is that they don't, when you ask people, you say, hey, look, we're going to determine our human resource needs, and they're like, okay, well, I need a person who can prepare tax returns. And I'm like, great, why don't you go ahead and give me the job description for that, and I'll give you 2 hours to get it. And the person says, well, wait, hold. He goes to the drawer, opens the drawer, pulls out a piece of paper. There you go. And it's the same stinking job description that he or she has had for the past 6 years. And guess what's happened in 6 years? It's changed. Okay, it's not rocket science. I mean, things change. Programs that I needed to know 6 years ago are not programs I need to know today. I would say, everybody knows that Excel is always kind of an important thing, but, writing skills are becoming much more important in the accounting industry. So there's various things that, that really need to be made sure that they're being developed. The worst thing that I've seen, I actually saw a job description that was trying to be used that was developed, 15 years before. And the most embarrassing thing when you're going through the meeting is when I go to an interview, I print out the job description that they put in there, and I ask them questions about it. And if the person behind the desk kind of goes, well, we really don't do that anymore. Well, yeah, that was important, a few years ago, but not really now. You've just told me that you finding me really wasn't that important, or at least you give that impression. Okay, so I tend to do that, and most organizations that I deal with nowadays, they will actually develop that plan, but it just drives me nuts when people don't update those things. So but that's going to be part of what we're going to end up doing. So getting back to determining human resource needs, one of the things I really like about this is that they're bringing in, what are the sales forecasts and how it might affect your hiring. That's where we see external forces of the HR department that are really affecting what we need to do. Because, and it's interesting, and one of these days I need to write a book called Everything I Needed to Learn in Life I Learned at McDonald's. I'm sure the McDonald's Corporation would really appreciate it. But we used to talk, I remember, when I was younger, I wanted to be what we called PC, which is production control. That's a person who sits there and he calls to the back, I need 6 Big Macs, or I need 3 Big Texans, bomb 3, or whatever, and he's calling back stuff and trying to bring stuff up. The person who's trying to do the production control, one of the things that'll end up happening is they're doing it based on forecasts. Production control person looks out, sees a whole bunch of people walking in. Holy smokes, I need 12 Big Macs now because I just saw 2 buses pull up. Okay, that's where you kind of have to be a little bit strategic in that sense. Now, obviously, with the organizations, you're not going to wait until the thing happens. Hopefully, you're planning that stuff out 3-4 months, 5 months in advance at least, if not a year or two. Recruiting, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the chapter 4, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But again, remember, strategic plan, diversity, recruiting's a pillar. So the support of recruiting is going to be your diversity, and it's also going to be your strategic plan. Not in that order, of course. Strategic plan being the basic foundation. But obviously, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we get into diversity and everything. Selection, they're just kind of an overview. Where they said, while it might seem exaggerated, consider the following items to be contributed to the cost, time to review interviews. And it's interesting. This brings up an interesting point. I think we'll probably talk about it, especially when we get into recruiting, the amount of time involved in recruiting. Because when you talk to people about cost of recruiting people go, okay, yeah, I got to hire a recruiter, and maybe I'm paying them $40,000, $50,000 a year if you're living in the Midwest. Maybe $50,000, $60,000 a year for a starting recruiter here in the East Coast. I mean, that's the only cost I really have, right? No, management's time. You have, time, that people have additional bookkeeping that has to be done. And they talk about this here, increased unemployment insurance costs, interview expenses for the candidates. What if I'm interviewing people and I want the best of the best of the best, and I'm going to go to Harvard and I want them to come down here and interview with me? Well, the Harvard guy's not going to sit there and say, well, I'll pay for it to come down to your organization. Be like, no, I'm going to bring you down here. I'm going to put you in the best hotel, and I'm going to make you feel so special that when I put down my offer, you're going to be like, wow, that's what I want to do. Okay, if I'm hiring the best of the best of the best. Now, obviously, my organization, we're not good enough yet to be able to do that, but we're working on it. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. And I talked about it in the last class or last video where I said, one of the wording that I found was that, it takes 3 times as much money to hire somebody that does to retain them, and that's a very true process. And then here's the problem: if you decide that you need to hire somebody in January for something to get done in January, good luck. Okay. Determining compensation in HR, we have different methods of doing that. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that when we get more into the compensation realm. Develop training. Again, we'll talk about that when we get more into the training world. Perform performance appraisals. Again, that's another chapter that we're going to kind of talk about. So this last section, tips in HRM planning. We're going to explain the aspects needed to create usable and successful HRM plans. So, they talk about a Fortune 500 focus. I'll let you kind of read that on your own. You want to link the strategic plan to the company plan, okay? And some people might go, what's the difference? Well, the strategic plan is where we want to go and how we want to get there and all that sort of stuff, whereas the company plan is sort of the day-to-day operational / tactical kind of stuff that's going on in order to get that done. You want to monitor the plan constantly. I remember when I took a human performance technology course, we talked a lot about, I took an entire course on evaluation, how we evaluate things. Evaluation is probably the one area that people, I don't know how else to put it, they jack it up so much, because once you've gone and you've implemented something, you're like, oh, wow, all that work's done, clink the champagne, pop the champagne cork, clink the glasses, and we're all happy and we've been successful. And then you're not monitoring it, and all of a sudden you begin to realize that your successful implementation actually falls off the edge of the earth because of something that you weren't paying attention to. So you want to make sure that it gets done correctly in that sense. You want to measure it. This is something that I used to have beaten to my head a lot. Yeah, it's great that you want to increase sales, but increase sales by how much? Because until you actually measure it, you're not going to be able to come up with what is it you're going to do in order to what is it you're going to need to do in order to meet that goal. I mean, if I sit there and say, yeah, I want to lose weight, okay, But if I say I want to lose 30 pounds, now I'm going to have to say, okay, if I want to lose 30 pounds and I want to do it in 3 months, I got to get cracking on some stuff. I'm going to have to do some running. I'm going to have to do some swimming. But if I say I want to lose 3 pounds, okay, well, maybe I, swap from eating, chicken wings every now and then to, more salads. So you see what I'm saying? You have to be able to measure it in order to be able to understand some of the things that you need to do in order to make make your goals happen. And we don't talk about it here specifically. Maybe we will later on. We talk about SMART, which is you want your goals to be SMART, which is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. And that attainable is always swapped out with another word, and I'm forgetting it right now, but I'll try to figure it out. But the SMART, you want your just to be specific. You have to be specific as to what you want to do. You want it to be measurable. And then, you also want it to be, then there's also that time base, which is very important. Because if it's measurable, and like, for example, let's go back to the example that I gave earlier. I want to lose 30 pounds. If I want to lose 30 pounds in 3 months, or if I want to lose 3 pounds in 3 months, it's a different measurement. If I want to lose 30 pounds in 30 days versus 30 pounds in, 3 months or 6 months, I'm going to take different activities in order to make sure that stuff happens, which, by the way, losing 30 pounds in 30 days is not an advisable thing. And if you're going to try to lose weight, please talk to your doctor. So I just want to make sure I put that public service announcement out. They talk about sometimes change is necessary. And one of the things they do talk about, and I kind of put this out, I got very upset when I was teaching a class recently. It wasn't at UMUC, thank God. But I realized that some of my students did not... their civics was horrid. They didn't realize, that some of them didn't even realize we had 2 houses of Congress, which, to me just blows my mind. You need to be aware of the legislative changes that are taking place, and you should understand how your government's working in order to how it affects your industry. Point blank. Guys, you're going to be paid an amazing amount of money to do this job. It's very important that we keep up with things in order to make sure that we are successful with certain things. All right, so we're coming to the end. They have a chapter case which you can go ahead and do in order to learn with this. That's all I got for today. I just want to say thank you very much for showing up. I did notice a couple people who are doing some of the views. I'm going to push out a little bit more. Hopefully we get this out timely enough that people can actually watch it and learn something from it, and I appreciate it. I'll work on chapter 3 as soon as I can. I don't think I'm going to get to it for a couple days, just because we've got some big stuff happening. But if you need to, reach out to me. I'm open. If you're in my class, go to Leo. You'll find my contact information. If you're not in my class, put it down in the comment bar, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.